My most recent project is building this pull-out cat feeding station in this closet here. And the reason we needed it was because this is the original feeding station, but the dog can get at it when he's upstairs, so that's not awesome. And we're starting with this closet door that I built to house what has been a cat box, because the dog likes to get at that too, and the door prevents that. So initially, we're building out the left and right edges of the closet so that the drawer slides are in a position where they clear the door and the door jamb when you pull the drawer open. And this is tricky because inside the closet, the two left and right walls are not parallel to each other. It's a bit of a parallelogram situation. So I'm building out the right-hand side first, and it needs more clearance. So that's the width of a 2x4 there that is going in, and it's going to allow the drawer slide to clear the door side of the closet without the drawer hitting the door or binding on the door. The left-hand side needed less clearance, so there's a little more Lexel and a piece of 1/2-inch plywood going in. And these are gonna hold the runners for the drawer slash shelf. And so we need to make sure they're parallel across the fronts and backs there. They're all in the same plane. And working in confined spaces is always a joy. All right, now I'm making the shelf or drawer. I say drawer because I'm building it as if it's a drawer, but I'm gonna install it upside down. And I'm just cutting all the pieces to length here. And then I'm going to use something called the quarter technique to assemble the sides and front and back of the drawer so that they're locked together. So I'm using the sliding fence jig on the table saw to cut a tongue in the front and back pieces on either end of the front and back pieces of the drawer. And then I'm going to use basically that same setting with the miter gauge to cut a groove into the left and right sides of the drawer. And these are all going to lock together, giving me a much tighter joint that will not come apart very easily when you pull on the front of the drawer. So I'm just going to fine tune the tongue in the front and back, and then I'm going to clean out the grooves and make sure we got a good fit there. You can see that. That's the front of the drawer. You can see how the way those fit together when you pull on the front of the drawer. You've got this interlocking situation that creates a much tighter joint that's not going to come apart over time. So here's the glue up, and I'm going to put a couple of clamps on there and tighten it all down. And then, as you do with anything square, you want to make sure it is actually going to be square. So I'm going to do a corner to corner measurement and make sure we're in good shape, which it turns out we are. And then I'm going to cut the drawer top. Now, this is a technique you can use if you have a piece that's too thick. You cut it on one side, you flip it over. But if you don't have a chop saw station like I don't, just be careful, because once you make the final cut, things can fall down on you. Now I'm going to cut a little hand groove here in the front of the drawer so that when you reach down to pull the drawer slash shelf out, you have an obvious place to put your hand and it's nice and smooth. So I'm using the router table. I'm going to do this in 2 passes so that I don't get any chatter and tear out. And now I'm going to round it over so it feels good on the hands. I'm going to round over the inside. And then I'm going to set up the router table to cut the rabbet in the top of the drawer so that I can set the platform in there, the plywood platform. So I was testing the height of that bit with the plywood that I'm going to inset there. So if I've got this right, the plywood should drop in and be exactly at the top of the surface of this shelf slash drawer. Then when you do it on a router, of course, your corners are rounded, so you either have to round off the piece you're putting in there or square off the corners that you cut. So here's the final cut to width for the drawer shelf top, and here's the glue up. And I feel like this is going to be a nice, tight thing that's not going to come apart very easily because of the drawer construction and the nice tight fit of that shelf. Now, if you flip this over, of course, it's a drawer that could contain things, but I'm going to use it upside down like this so that it's a shelf that pulls out of the closet that the cats can then have their feeding station on. A little bit of sanding connected to the dust collection system, a little bit of hand sanding to make sure it all feels smooth. And then we're going to do the final assembly. And I did time lapse here because this was a super fiddly job. Because the walls inside there aren't parallel, I had to mess with it a little bit to make sure I had the drawer slides parallel to each other so that the drawer went in and out, or the shelf went in and out smoothly. So I tested it a bunch of times and then fully attached the shelves, and there we are, final product. Nice and easy. So here's what it looks like with the feeding station in there. And probably going to take a little bit of time to get the cats used to this new feeding station, but always seems like he's interested. Thanks for watching.